has always been a goal to, present to Vietnam, to the government on my learnings, in any way that I could contribute to the better of the nation itself, is definitely a great outcome from this. So by all means, these are my experiences within Australia, more specifically around BIM. And that's ultimately what we're talking about today. So hopefully you will learn a bit more around the opportunities that's happening in Australia, how we're utilizing the technology here. And with that, I'll probably just begin. So I work for a company. This is basically my own company. And what we specialize in is software consulting. So I do have experience in engineering and construction. I have been in the industry for probably over 12 years now. And through my progression of career, it's just headed down the path of software and technology. So we, like you can see there, does software. We do BIM and digital engineering, but not so much under BIM management or digital engineering management. We develop the tools and technology to support those type of works. And then finally, design science or data science is what we specialize in as well. So a bit of data management and so on. Similar to the profile that Anbin showed before, obviously this is an English translation, but my specialty in what I do within my business is help companies, organizations, and even government level understand the technical workflow. So there's always a procurement and contract level, and then the software and technology flow. So how does the policy and the technology go in hand? And that's what I do a lot. We do a lot of other consulting on private projects, public, government type projects, as well to an organization level. So if you were looking at optimizing design, optimizing data management within your organizations, we would help flesh those issues out for your business. And then finally, like I said before, software development. Some of our clients, so we work not only within Australia themselves, but abroad in other areas. You might know a company called YTL. They're located in Malaysia. You can see some other companies there like Honeywell. They are a global brand and specialize in building management systems and maintenance and asset management. So we support them in a few of our projects. Schneider as well, similar to Honeywell, Internet of Things, sensors, building management systems, infrastructure sensors, and so forth. The bigger one to note is we do work with Autodesk. So we're lucky to have partners like them to bring us in to support them where possible. And finally, Contender is another company. I think that one is in Europe. Yeah, so a broad range of clientele from small, medium, and large. So that's the good thing about running your own business. You get insight of both aspects, and you get to decide and choose the jobs you like to do. So what is technical workflow? So most of them is understanding how your business currently runs. So in, I guess, the organization, in the Ministry of Construction, or even within your own practice, if you're looking at adopting BIM or technology, or even looking at a new process, I definitely recommend you look internally and understand, well, what is the current workflow? How are you actually doing it now? So if you get an understanding of where you are now, any improvements or any modifications or any changes to the process gets added, you at least know that if you're progressing, upwards in terms of you're gaining value, or if you're dropping and in time and value. So if you don't know where you are, and then you implement all these changes, you're never going to know the percentage and value it's going to have to the business. So we help establish some of those things. The other one is, like I said, consulting work that we do. And this one was for the company YTL. And basically it was a dual track electric train system from obviously from Johor all the way to Gemis. The track itself, as you see, almost 200 kilometers with 11 stations. So that's our involvement to that project. What we've done specifically is help generate some digital assets. So they manage a lot of the, I guess, the production of the culverts. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen models dealt with 3D. And there's always this perception that in the model it looks small. So this is one of the culverts, but in reality, that's how big some of the culvert sizes are. And I'm sure in Vietnam, being a tropical state, or in the tropical location, you get the monsoon seasons where there's a lot of rain, a lot of weather, and so forth. So that's some of the work we've done. Further to this is, how do we explore data from a city's perspective? We've seen a lot of interest lately on how state, or within Australia, state and local authorities, how they're going to be able to better manage assets around the city. So we've been able to work in a lot of these spaces, help with GIS information, civil CAD information, as well as BIM deliverables as well. So there's a variety of information that gets incumbent into a department. So similar to, I guess, Vietnam in various departments, they would have to have someone that manages these assets. So we've been helped explore those type of solutions. And then the other part is of the tools that we do develop a lot of data compliance. So the good thing about Vietnam and what you guys are doing, the Ministry of Construction is doing now, is you're setting these policies at the moment, or you may have already. You're asking all these data requirements, but what I would definitely recommend, Ministry of Construction, or even your own organization, if you're asking for digital information as a deliverable, have a think about, well, what's some of the automation we can build into this. So if you're asking for classification, you can build audit tools that check a model and make sure that these classifications have been entered into the elements necessary. So this one here is we developed a little design checking tool. Basically, in Australia, we have a lot of clients have a manual called the Basis of Design. So it's kind of like a rule requirement of, let's say for a road, a road of 40 to 60 kilometers, you need a minimum radius curve of X or a certain distance. We can code those rules and check it against the models. And that's what this yellow and red indicates. Yellow means it's a warning, so be mindful. Red is, it's an error. So you might want to redesign or investigate what's going on. And then further on to that, what I spoke about around design management and data management. This is probably the last example I want to show before we dive into BIM in Australia, is tracking of design issues within a project. So here, just to give you some bit of commentary, I think this is a great way to present to anyone or the audience how you can use data. So we all know, or you may know, how to do clash management, right? But what does that look like in the life of a project? So here, the three peaks, the three design phases within the project. It's preliminary design, so you can see everyone issued their model and there's been a spike. There's detailed design. Again, everyone issued their model and there's a spike of information and problems. And then at tender phase of a project. And again, you can see the spike, but once tender has been submitted, we can see that there's a massive drop and everyone's gone and resolved that issue for that particular project. So that's just clashes within the project itself, right? But in this diagram here shows us a different image. So at the same time during the tender period, what's happened here is there's a lot of RFIs or requests for information, further design clarification that still needs to be resolved, but it can be done during the tender or after tender phase. And that's what's happening here. We can see that there's been a slow increase of these RFIs or further, I guess, design issues. And that's what's causing this diagram. So it's showing us that we're progressively solving a lot of these issues. So you can see the green indicates that it's been solved. And then finally, there's, obviously other ways of how we can present this information to the audience. I'm not going to dive a bit into this. This is just an indication of data matching, but what I'll get straight into the, I guess, BIM in Australia. So obviously we went through an introduction. I'll talk a bit about, obviously, if you're not sure, if some of you guys are not aware where Australia is, I'll definitely run through that. And then I want to talk through some of the states in Australia. So I guess in Vietnam, my understanding is it's just a country, and it's a one-party system, which is fine, I suppose. In Australia, we have a federal system, and then we break it down into states, and then there's locals. So this is probably a better explanation of where Australia is if you guys aren't aware. Obviously, Vietnam's here. I live in Brisbane, so that's around 8-hour flight, I think it is, direct to Vietnam. So Australia itself is a very rugged country. I live more closer to the coast. So this is where I am in Queensland, and there is a couple of regions. There is, a couple of cities. So there's Brisbane and there's Gold Coast. So anytime you guys in town or ever coming to Brisbane, let me know. I'll definitely show you around. But I wanted to explain this to you. So there is basically 3 levels within Australia in terms of authorities, if you will. The first one is the federal government. Okay, so federal government basically manages all of Australia. So there'll be policies and legislations and so forth for the federal. So everyone has to act and follow that. Then we have state territories. Okay, so state is broken down into kind of regions, and that's where we'll talk about Queensland, New South Wales, and then Victoria. So they're the states, and I live in Queensland there. And then further to that, we have local authorities, which is kind of like councils or certain regions within each state. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some guidance or understanding of what's happening there. Now, within these BIM requirements within Australia, at the moment, they're written at a state level. Okay, so it's been written at each state. Okay, so what that means is local authorities are basically required to comply with that level. Now, at the moment, there's been some conversations within the federal level, but there hasn't been any mandate as of yet. Okay, if I compare this into UK, United Kingdom, there is obviously the mandate PAS 1192, but there is also other local versions of it. So there's Scotland, I think there's Wales, and vice versa, other areas. So the United Kingdom has enforced this. So that's if you compare that in Australia, that's kind of like at a federal level. But at the moment, it's just basically driven at a state level. So I want to give you also a little history, like a timeline of where we started and how we came to this place, to this point. So really, for us in Australia, it wasn't really until 2010 BIM really became a buzzword. It became a actual tangible term that everyone was starting to use in delivering the project. Obviously, there was that BIM discussion and people using technology before that, but it wasn't really until 2010 that I found that everyone was saying we can do BIM. Every company and every client, I wouldn't even say client, every company was saying we were doing BIM as a way of delivering better value to our customers and reducing risk and so forth. So that kept on going for a couple of years. And what happened I guess in 2013 is we had user groups, and we always had them. We had technology user groups. But what happened was the industry didn't want to silo themselves in software. So they didn't want to say, well, we are a Revit user group, we are an ArchiCAD user group, or EcoSim user group. It became more broad, and that's where the term, BIM user groups or BIM workshops and things like that kind of became more the theme. And so in 2015 becomes a mainstream. We have industry, I guess, consultants trying to establish their way of doing things. And unfortunately, the problem there was each company had their own way of delivering their projects. And in a sense, that decentralized, I guess, all the expectations we had around BIM at that time, the workflow, everyone had a different way of doing things, and there was no standard way of achieving it. And we know that now. We know that in technology, there's so many different ways of still achieving the same outcome, but it's how you get there. And then in roughly around 2016, the UK has started mandating BIM on their projects. And from Australia perspective, it was a great thing to see that the government was pushing this, given that the industry for so long was trying to support and push this within our industry itself. So when UK did it, we were up in arms in here in Australia, trying to push it and promote it with our government levels. And unfortunately, I don't think it ever gained the traction as we thought it would, not until 2017 and 2018 and so forth. And that's when finally certain states have taken the initiative where they've seen the industry raise their concerns around better policies, better processes and guidelines of how BIM should be managed on a project, as they see the value. But at the moment, the client, in this case the government or state government, wasn't too sure on how this is going to affect their procurement or affect their way of delivering projects. So come 2018, 2019, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria essentially rolled out their own versions of a BIM guideline, and that's how it came into fruition. So if you haven't and you're not aware, basically, I'll just bring this website across so you can see. This is all available. It's accessible. So if you ever wanted to read and have a further look, definitely go to this website. What I want to show you is basically in November 2018, Queensland issued basically, I guess, this document enabling them or presenting to the Queensland community itself what they deemed as a first step into digitalization or BIM for the government. And one thing you want to note here is a lot of policies and, I guess, mandates have been driven because the government wanted the industry to follow those steps. Whereas in the Queensland approach, which I kind of appreciate, was slightly different. Even though it was a public letter, in the document, when you read through it, what it was saying is this letter, or this principle for BIM implementation, was has been produced for the use by the officers within the Queensland government, including departments, agencies, and statutory authorities. So what it was saying was, here's how we're going to do BIM, or this is why we want to do BIM, and you guys, in being the departments within the government, we want you to start looking at this in your own organization. And so when I say organization, even though it is a government department, it still is kind of somewhat run separately as an organization. So that's where it started. The other one was, the driver for this was to show not only Queensland, but the whole of Australia and internationally, that the Queensland government was committed in adopting BIM in the very near future. But it wanted to show those that are looking to invest within Queensland that there is confidence that when we move forward in the future, we're going to have these BIM protocols, these BIM guidelines and so forth, and requirements that's going to help reduce a lot of risk to our projects. So basically the assessment here, or the outline, is any projects of around 50 million or more needs to have some BIM deliverable or some BIM applied to the project. And I know when that is said and done, it's very broad. It's like, well, why BIM a project? So they put some objectives in place. Okay, so this is where the document refers back to. Here are the objectives. So when there's a BIM project above 50 million or so, this is the objective we want to achieve. So in a way, they've pushed the question and the opportunity back to the industry. So this is a government project. For example, this is a government project. It's 50 millions and so on. We want you to apply BIM to this project, and we want you to give us some idea or some options around how can we utilize BIM to reduce project risk, improve safety, improve built outcomes, improve asset management. So the good thing about this approach is we're outlining the end goal, and how we get there is still optional. It's still open to every department, every contractor, consultant, and so forth. And what I like about this approach is, or one of the benefits is, you're opening the options for innovation. Yeah. So if you're saying, we want to achieve this, but we're happy for you to approach it whichever way you want, it does develop a competitiveness in the industry to be more innovative. And we'll see some other examples, where sometimes putting so many restrictions in how people or other organizations operate can inhibit some of those innovative approaches. So this is one of the case studies, project case studies here in Queensland. So Department of Transport and Main Roads is effectively a department that manages all the roads, footpaths, and I guess all the accessible assets within Queensland. So if you remember looking at the map before, it's a pretty big land and zone. So even though we can see it's a nice, pretty model, essentially this project itself, as we walk through and look through it in detail, there's obviously a lot of existing facilities. This was an existing highway, and obviously upgrading an existing road takes a lot of planning. So one of the goals that they did achieve with this was by having just a simple model, I suppose, and I wouldn't say simple, sorry, a model with enough attributes. You know, for instance, this is a barrier, that's a lighting pole, this is the road. Simple items like that, they're able to better plan how they're going to construct this, the staging, and really sit down with other stakeholders. So you imagine if we were going to construct this, how are we going to communicate to the businesses and say, well, hey, we're going to be building this for the next 2-3 years, or even more. We're going to have this type of impact to your business, and have community consultation. So within Australia, I suppose in a lot of our projects, there is a lot of community feedback. If it's a state project, there is local authority feedback and so forth. If it's federal, there's state feedback and local feedback. So there's always definitely that collaborative approach to any capital works within Australia. And this is where a lot of, I guess, confusion and miscommunication happens on these type of projects when you can't see the full picture or the scale of it in the actual impact itself. So just keep playing that through. Okay. The other one is, you know, as part of this, I guess, approach to BIM, this was deemed as a pilot project. Okay, so what that meant was it was one of the first projects that the department was looking at enforcing BIM as a deliverable or a way of delivering the project, but also a way to assess, well, how much have we actually improved versus how much have we wasted in terms of time and effort. So that was what, I guess, a pilot project is deemed between these departments. So we saw the pretty picture of the renders, which is great, but ultimately drilling down to the construction and sequencing. In this case, it's very important that civil projects are managed effectively. If they're not, time is money, you know, so we all know time is money. And if there's any calculations and missed estimates, or even just purely missed tasks. So if we missed a critical task in the project, that adds time to the overall budget and so forth. So having a digital representation of what's going to be built helps. And you can imagine if I was sitting here explaining to everyone how I'm going to build this, we can now have consultation, we can have feedback on how that's going to work. So that's the, I guess, one of the definitely outcomes of that particular project. So coming back to Queensland, their BIM approach has been very simple. It's not complex. Literally, this is their guideline. Yeah. They have a 7-page document that talks about their departments internally. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to try to achieve. Go ahead and look at some opportunities on doing that. So every department has gone down their own path on how to achieve that. So that's one thing I enjoyed about the Queensland approach. It's very simple in its form, but effective as well. Now, heading towards Victoria now. So this is further down south. Similar to Queensland, all this information is available. You can definitely search it on Google if you guys have access. But if not, I've provided a link here as well. So further to that, Victoria has approached this from an asset management perspective. So ultimately, in the end of the day, their goal in this approach was, we have a very large city with historical significance. We have different assets from light rails, roads, trams, tunnels, you name it, like any other city would. And so how do we better manage this information? So that's where they talk about the term here called, we say VDAS because it's just VDAS, but what it means is the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy. Okay, I'm just gonna skim this across up here. So why? So like I explained before, it is an emphasis on the assets. This particular building, I think it is Flinders Station. I could be wrong. But this is a very historical building in Victoria, and I'm sure in Vietnam we have very historical colonial buildings from the period of the French and so forth. How we're going to manage that? How do you want to retain some of that historical significance, and how do you better manage that? So the same approach from Victoria, that's what they try to do. Now, their approach is again similar for government, but in this case the stakeholders, and it's for the department who manages and creates these assets. So what they've done is a fair bit of documentation. Actually, they spoke about, well, here's your current role within the department, but if we look at VDAS, or the digital asset strategy, your role is going to change. And that's true, because now that in the past, you might be doing a specific task, such as copying an asset register, transferring it to another system, whereas the future now could be, you don't need to do that. It's all automated. So your role has slightly changed. And that's what the VDAS has tried to identify, is what this is going to look like within each parts of the business, and how is it going to work in terms of the supply chain. And when I say supply chain, it's the consultants, the contractors, and the trades, and so forth. So this one is a better example of what they've done. So there's a few parts to this document. There is the part A, which talks about the strategic approach and why. And like I mentioned before, it's focused on the departments and the leads in that business. We have the other part, which is the organizational aspect. So what does that mean for that business? So we talk about strategic of the end goal, the ultimate reason why we need this. We then have part B, which is the organization. So how is this now going to be implemented, and what is it going to look like to all the current systems we have in place? And then the application. So this is where it's probably more important from a consultant perspective, is, well, if I need to now deliver what I traditionally used to do using, paper and PDFs and so forth, what is that going to impact? How's that going to impact on me? And that's where this comes into play, about the, I guess, part C and how it's been applied to a project. So, they have a larger vision as well. So not only are we talking about specific assets, so not just the length of road, we're talking around the entire city itself. And if you guys have been and may have known Melbourne, it is a very, very large city, and the city centre itself is quite big. So this talks about a pretty good approach. So, obviously the resource, the guidance, there's the guidance of how you structure this from a procurement contract perspective, but then the technical guidance further is how is this actually going to be implemented? And then, as you saw before, it breaks down into these three values. The appendices, so this section here, there's quite a lot. And similar to PAS 1192, they speak about these parts as well. So we talk about organization information requirements. So there's an outline there. There's AIR, asset information. They got the digital engineering execution plan as well, but they've called it a response in this case. There's a whole bunch of suite of documents here, but ultimately the approach in Victoria is they have asset management in the end of their mind. And so everything's been formulated leading up to that. Similar to Queensland, their approach is, I would say, somewhat similar. A client will develop what is called an execution plan or a digital engineering brief. So the brief could be similar to a very high level document saying, hey, we want BIM on a project. These are the outcomes we want to achieve. And then as a tenderer or a consultant or contractor, we develop a BIM execution plan, or in this case, a digital engineering execution response in that brief. So we would say, well, here's our team. We're presenting our team to you. This is how we're going to achieve those objectives that you've set out in the brief. And this is our approach and how we're going to implement it on the project itself. So those are some benefits, because you can see, you know, each tenderer, have they thought through exactly how it's going to be delivered and how it's going to be achieved. Because most of the time, a lot of, in my experience, a lot of contractors or consultants say that, yeah, we can do BIM, we can help you here and there. But ultimately, when it gets to the project and we start digging in ground, we start construction, people and the team itself still don't know how to deliver the project. They're just focusing on drawings, and that's what we're going to do. We're just going to produce our drawings for construction. But the BIM deliverable just gets left to the very end, which just costs more ultimately, and it just causes confusion and headache and just pain in the end of the day. So similar to, I guess, a lot of projects in Queensland as well, Victoria is essentially using it for BIM for a lot of coordination aspects of the project. And we're seeing that at this level, that the level of maturity in a lot of projects has been purely around management of design, management of constructability. And that's really where it's kind of driven down to. Victoria itself refers to the uni class, and what I have here is at the end of the section, I got this comparison table that talks about uni format, omni class, master format, a few various formats, and it's probably good to talk through to you guys about it, so that you know what the differences are. But ultimately, you want classifications for a few things. One is the procurement and estimation leading to, I guess, the project being constructed. And then finally, the other part is how these unique IDs essentially map to these assets can be further harnessed or used down the track after in operations or handover and so forth. And that's ultimately what some of these the classification does. It helps with those things, but if you're not technically knowledgeable of what these classifications mean and what they refer to, this is probably a good kind of cheat card that I would use, that talks about the classification, how it's named, the hierarchy, its location. And there's other types of systems as well. So the system use, the material use, and so forth. So that's probably just a snippet of what that looks like. But I'll talk a bit more about that down the track. So that was Victoria. So in summary, with Victoria, their focus was management, ultimately managing their assets that they have. So they built a whole digital framework around our end goal is we want to manage that. And this is how we're going to achieve it for when we build capital projects, maintenance type projects, or upgrades and so forth. That's how we would approach it. And I like their approach on, we've given you a brief. We want you then to return that brief as a response. here's a template. So then the good thing about that is when you get multiple tenders, you have a line by line item so that you can compare what one contractor, one tenderer versus the other tenderer and how they're planning to deliver that. So it's a good way of approaching it in that sense. New South Wales. So if you guys know, this is where Sydney is located. Their approach is, I would say, the most developed. And when I mean most developed, it's probably more in the lines of they've continuously changed and made updates. And they've always kept the industry informed of what's happening. So similar to the others, they have a website. All of this is presented online. So again, if you guys prefer to look at this document, it's all there. And I'll go through it in brief here. So their approach covers in a lot of sectors of the industry. They talk about digital twin in the first instance, and that's because they want to look at better ways of managing assets, and what better way than a digital representation of that. The reason why digital representation might be more effective comes down to a few things. Visually, you can see what that looks like, what that structure and that asset looks like. Visually as well, you can see where there could be potential issues when it comes to maintenance. And then finally, the associated data. So you imagine if you're looking at a plant room, you select a particular pump, you have all the attributes you need, such as, when it was last maintained, when it was, who was the person that last accessed that facility, and so forth. You have a whole log of that. Procurement. So obviously this framework supports how people can tender for a particular project, guidance on what's an acceptable allowance in terms of providing this service, as well as how are we able to define value saved in a project as well. So typically in most projects, when you ask for something, that means the cost of the project is higher. So if I've asked for BIM, usually consultants say, oh, well, if you want BIM, this is going to cost you more. But it is an interesting question or perspective, because shouldn't BIM save money? That's ultimately what we've been sold. So how do you track that? How do you actually know that if a consultant's charge you more for a premium service, which is fair, if they're doing more than what they normally do, is there reduction in cost from other departments? Yeah. So it's a question. Ways of working. So like you all know, when we bring different ways of working, procurement, technology, different skill sets, the way we work has to change. We can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and then use a different software to do that, because that's not going to solve those improvements. The software might be faster, but if you're still doing the same process, that's not going to help. So they explore with this in this framework. They like to explore that. Technology is pretty straightforward, exploring what tools are out there, and then finally, how do we uplift the industry in their skill sets and capability? There's no point a government forcing everyone to do, or I won't say government, but like an authority to force everyone down a technology path when the skills and the people there don't understand it and they don't know how to comprehend and use it. So that's their approach, which basically these are the pillars that they are looking to focus at. And you could say, when I compare this to Queensland, it's throwing a small cast net. So you throw a small net The resistance when you pull that net back is not as much because it's very small, the net's small. Whereas what they've done here in New South Wales, it's a very large net and it's going to catch every facet of the business. It's going to be a slow process in pulling that everyone up, but you're doing all at once. Yeah, so that's their kind of comparison. I want to present probably a case study. So again, if you go to the Transport New South Wales website, they talk about the introduction. Okay, we definitely can click into it further. It has broken down into a few sections here. So the website's quite straightforward for industry to use and access. So this is the digital engineering framework. They talk about the release. So they have a magnitude of different type of documents, again, all accessible. And then finally, they talk about the pillars that I was talking about. So the digital twins, the procurement, and finally, what I want to show you is they do have other type of pilot projects, okay? But I wanted to show this one for you guys because I think this might be of some definite valuable to you. So basically, this is a light rail project. I guess it's another infrastructure type project. I won't play the audio, but you can watch this in your own time, and you can definitely access this whenever you see fit. Now, I just want to pause, revert back. There we go. So I like this particular project, and as similar to other projects as well. You're converting. I'm not sure the true details of this one, but other type projects I've seen, you're either converting an existing road to then change its function and purpose. So in this case, that it is a light rail project, but in other cases, some projects I've seen where they've turned a road into a light rail track. Now there's challenges with that because there is existing services, existing structures, and so forth. And I guess similar to Vietnam, as well as in Australia and Sydney more specifically, there is a long history. So we have, Australia, even though it's quite a young country in that sense, compared to its counterparts, we have a lot of in-ground services. So there's pipes, information like in-ground electrical, gas, water installed, and you'd never have a handle on exactly where it's installed. It's always a risk. So there's a pipe down a particular direction, but is it a meter over this side? Is it a meter that side? 2 meters, 3 meters? It's very hard to understand that. So what they've done here for this particular department, and Transport for New South Wales is, I guess, similar to Transport of Main, TMR, Transport of Main Roads in Queensland as well. So they manage roads and vehicular access. So what they've done here is developed a solution to capture information of where assets are located, and in this case, in-ground pipeworks, civils. So when they do any upgrades in the future, a way to reduce risk to the project is provide this information to the contractor. Oh, sorry. So they can now say, hey, contractor, here's all of our information where we know that these are where the pipes are located and so forth. So this helps reduce risk from a contractor perspective, because if he knows that there's a pipe there and he's, 90% sure the pipe is there versus 50% sure, that doesn't help. So there's a few things here: point cloud capturing, LiDAR, and so forth. But ultimately, they, or the contractor, or when it gets into construction, you want to know where this is located. So basically, I guess to sum up this situation here is what they've done here is not produce a BIM model or anything. They've just looked internally within their business or organization to consider, well, how do we better manage the assets that we already have in ground? Okay, it's not always about the new construction, the new build. It's what we have now and how do we capture that information, which is a lot of cost. So we're almost to a conclusion. So with New South Wales, as you saw there, their approach is vastly broader. They look at skills in the industry, they're looking at ways of working differently, the technology, how this is going to affect procurement, costing of the project, and then ultimately their vision of a digital twin, which is some type of digital representation of their asset. It doesn't have to be a model. It can be databases. It could be data that shows the location, vice versa. Now, this is where I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about the classifications. So similar to Queensland, they've followed a uni-class format. And I think it's probably good that you guys understand what the classification system is. Okay, so there's 4 types. There's the master format, which was developed by the CSI, which is located in America. We have the uni format, again, developed in the States. We have the uni class, which is developed in the UK, and Omni class, again, an American method. Now, if we go back to the original kind of definition of this, a master format is really organizing these elements, or if you will, sorting them in a way that is more fitted towards construction. So master format, in a simpler term, I would say, is mainly built for construction. It does, have the products, activities, and so forth, but it's essentially down to a contractor perspective. Now, there obviously are other benefits and pros and cons, and I won't go into those type of details, but I think getting that concept of the understanding that it is preferably for construction. The other one is uni format. So again, similar to the above master format, this is breaking it down further. So you'll have a master format and a uni format. So these somewhat go hand in hand, and it arranges construction information organized around the physical parts of the facility, also known as a functional element. So this can get broken down into, as you see here, as activities. Okay, so an activity could be installation of piles or shoring systems, so edge, foundation works. That could be an activity. But a uni format breaks it down to, here's the piles, here's the reinforcement cage, here's the temporary works, breaking it down to each element. Okay, and that's, again, an aspect of how I could, I guess, explain it to you guys. Uni format, from a UK perspective, I think I had a conversation last night with Unbin and Untan about this. The reason why I think Australia has gone down the uni-class format is we are essentially a Commonwealth country. So what that means is, I wouldn't say we're ruled, but basically we follow the Queen in the hierarchy of the United Kingdom, and naturally we kind of lean towards some of the things they do there. Of course, if the states are doing it better, we're always open to following some of their processes there as well. But in here, they cover all aspects from design to construction process. And then basically they drill it down to the material and the product itself. So we see that as a benefit because it works in design and construction, and it labels a material and it labels the product and the use of that product as well. So it covers all aspects of it. Now, in the end of the day, it's really these institutes, the NBS or the CSI, are kind of running and managing this. So ultimately, if you guys haven't selected a classification yet, just I'd imagine you would reach out to these institutes and have a discussion of how flexible they are. Because if you're going down a classification that's already been used in an industry, I think that's a good thing because someone else has already done a lot of the work. You're just following it and you're just adding new ones as you need. I do not recommend going off and build your own classification system because it just causes further confusions, I suppose. But again, in I guess the Western world and in Australia and so forth, these are the 4 classifications that are more commonly used. The good thing about that is, let's say in the future, and this is just me thinking out loud, is if let's say your department wants to improve and innovate and you want to bring outside experience into the country, you know, you can do that as well. You can bring an expert from the States, and I'm sure you're doing it already, experts from Europe and Australia, bring them into the country and get them working in your country or in your department. And with their knowledge and expertise with these classifications, you can further enhance those abilities. So what I'm saying is the skill sets are out there already. People know these things. If you develop your own, you know, you'll have to ultimately teach and train these industry people how to use a new classification. But if you never use the classification at all, then there's a hard argument there, and I'll let that become a debate for the future. So, I guess in summary, I hope that presenting to you the pros and cons, some of the approaches that the Queensland state, New South Wales, and Victoria have done. Ultimately, in the end of the day, you know, the government, the client, private or public, what is your end goal? Okay, if someone has just come to your department and says, "Oh, BIM's the best thing you should do," adopt it, and you're just thinking that BIM's going to save you money, that's not a good approach, unfortunately, and that doesn't give you a clarity of what your end goal is. If it's ultimately, you know, better management running of the city, better management running of a particular area, then ultimately that's your asset. It's the people. So what is that end goal? And I think if you know the end goal is to better improve whatever that might be, I think developing those protocols, those steps, the guidelines to achieve that is definitely much easier. And I guess in summary, Queensland approach was, you know, open the question to the departments internally within the government industries, show the industry that they are confident and investing in BIM in the future, and allow tenderers to kind of present them the opportunity of what they want to do. Or you can do New South Wales approach, which is have pillars of all aspects of the industry within New South Wales. What will the result of that is a lot of effort in setting up these strategies, these frameworks, these policies, the training sessions, the workshops, getting everyone up to speed, and then actually doing it as well. So actually achieving and delivering it. And then finally in Victoria, you know, ultimately it's asset management, the city, the management of the city and the way of life in the city itself. And so that was a natural decision to have all these assets managed, you know, and looking at other ways such as data and I guess the term digital twins as well. Okay, so hopefully you guys got something out of that. I hope I haven't confused you or anything, but thank you for this great opportunity again, and really hope that this has helped. Thank you.
Cảm ơn anh Quốc. Thì bài trình bày thì vừa rồi anh Quốc cũng đã chia sẻ rồi, thì bây giờ không biết là anh chị và các bạn có ai có câu hỏi gì không? Thì có thể bật mic lên. Có ai có câu hỏi nào không ạ? Mời Thành.
Okay. So a question for your. Can you move back to the slide when you talk about the approach of the Australian government? Yeah, because yesterday after our meeting I have another discussion, and my lecturer, he said that like for an example, in the ANU 2 years ago we tried to apply BIM for one new building, but the problem is that because we did not identify, I did not specify all our requirements, we just put only the objective and some ultimate goals of the project apply BIM. Therefore, they could not evaluate the tender proposal, because like every contractor has different approach. So like, so in your opinion, like because in Vietnam now we also try to find a way to apply BIM. So what do you think about approach that Vietnam should apply?
Well, I think the big one is probably, I definitely think that what you should maybe consider doing is asking the contractors or the tenderers to submit their approach. And there's two things that come out of that, which I think is very good. One is you'll get an idea of how well your document is written. So if you've written a document of these objectives and these outcomes and goals, if it's not understood by the tenderers, then their response will be very clear. It wouldn't be aligned. The documents will be completely separate. The other one is you'll understand their capability and skill sets. So if they respond and say, well, we can do BIM, but they don't go into detail, then those are, to me, are warning signs that, well, are they really capable of delivering that? Another one is when you open the question to your tenderers around what can they provide, you'll find that some of them are really, if they're really knowledgeable and experienced in digital delivery, then you'll find that they'll have pretty good ideas of innovation and approaches. And the good thing about that is if you have 2 or 3 that have good ideas, you can pick what you like out of each tenderer to then return back a brief and say, hey, well, actually, we think this is what we want, and so forth. It is a bit more fast-paced in terms of you'll have to review that, get responses, and then try to brief the industry again for a re-tender or tendering of that section of works. But I think that's one good way, especially if you're saying you're piloting projects in Vietnam right now, it's good to get an idea of how well the industry perceives that. And I think that's one good approach that you can definitely take.
Yeah,
that helps sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Anh Quốc.
Thành ơi, có một số bạn có bảo là ấy thì Thành có thể tóm tắt lại được không? Tại vì là xin lỗi các bạn là anh Quốc thì cũng
không nói được tiếng Việt nhiều.
Nói được tiếng Việt nhiều nên là chủ yếu là hỏi là tiếng Anh. Thế nhưng mà nếu mà các bạn cần dịch tóm lược lại thì có gì Thành sẽ hỗ trợ cái đấy.
Dạ, tức là cái câu hỏi của em ấy, tức là tại vì lúc mà Quốc trình bày về cái chiến lược áp dụng BIM ở Úc, thì ở trong này thì cái chiến lược áp dụng BIM ở đây thì ở Úc thì người ta có nhiều bang và từng bang người ta lại áp dụng cách khác nhau, nhưng mà có cái đặc biệt đó là ở Queensland ấy, thì người ta sẽ không có một cái gọi là cái khung chi tiết để mà áp dụng BIM, mà người ta đưa ra các mục tiêu của cái dự án của người ta và để cho các nhà thầu tự đề xuất các phương án để làm BIM. Thì hôm qua em cũng có nói chuyện với thầy giáo của em, thì tức là ở trường của em, ở trường ANU ấy, thì cách đây 2 năm cũng có một cái dự án tương tự mà giờ đang xây rồi, tức là người ta muốn áp dụng BIM vào một cái tòa nhà mới, nhưng mà cái vấn đề đó là người ta cũng không có đưa ra bất kỳ một cái cụ thể nào về việc áp dụng BIM, mà người ta lại đưa ra một cái người ta lại đưa ra những cái mục tiêu mà lúc vận hành thôi, tức là kiểu như mục tiêu sau khi bàn giao xong thì chủ đầu tư cần cái gì thôi. Và nó nảy sinh một cái vấn đề đó là khoảng 3-4 nhà thầu thì cả 3-4 ông thì đều có những cái gọi là cái cách tiếp cận để mà làm BIM khác nhau, thành ra nó không có gọi là comparable, tức là theo kiểu là không có, rất là khó để so sánh với nhau ấy. Và cái thời đó thì chấm thầu nó rất là khó, thì em mới hỏi đó là ví dụ như mà ở Việt Nam ấy, cho những cái nước mà ví dụ như ở Việt Nam đang chuẩn bị phía bên đơn vị cơ quan quản lý nhà nước chuẩn bị bắt đầu muốn áp dụng BIM trực tiếp vào ấy, thì nên đi theo cái hướng nào, tức là có một cái khung chi tiết hay là kiểu chỉ đưa ra một cái mục tiêu chung vậy thôi. Thì câu trả lời của Quốc đó là thì tức là mỗi cái thì nó đều có một cái ưu điểm khác nhau, cái ưu nhược điểm khác nhau, nhưng mà cái ví dụ như mà nếu như mà mình đi theo kiểu của ở bây giờ ấy, thì tức là khi mà mình chỉ đưa ra những cái mục tiêu của mình thôi ấy, thì nó sẽ dễ hơn cho nhà thầu, tức là mình sẽ không có bị bó buộc vào. Và lúc mà mình đưa ra các mục tiêu mình đọc vào ấy, thì nếu như mà mình có đủ khả, tức là mình sẽ đi vào chi tiết, tức là nó sẽ khó để so sánh, nhưng mà mình có thể đọc được các ví dụ như là các kỹ năng hay là các kinh nghiệm hay là các cái thứ tiếp cận của các về BIM của các đơn vị nhà thầu ấy, thì mình cũng có thể nhìn ra được đó là đơn vị nào tốt hơn, đơn vị nào kém hơn. Đồng thời một cái nữa đó là khi mà mình áp dụng BIM theo cái kiểu gọi là chỉ đưa ra những cái mục tiêu thôi ấy, thì cái ở giai đoạn đầu thì ví dụ như các cơ quan quản lý nhà nước sẽ hiểu được là ví dụ như là bây giờ là cái trình độ áp dụng BIM của các đơn vị kiểu như nhà thầu hay là tư vấn nó chỉ đến đây thôi, tức là mình không có đưa ra cái khung chi tiết thì người ta sẽ phải tự phát triển, và qua đó thì mình cũng sẽ thấy được cái khả năng của người ta. Và có rất là nhiều cái phương án mà sau khi mà gọi là mở thầu lần một có ví dụ không thành công chẳng hạn, thì mình có thể cập nhật lại, mình có thể dựa trên những cái mà mình kết quả lần trước mình có thể cập nhật lại gói thầu, hoặc là cập nhật lại cái hồ sơ dự án để mà có thể đấu thầu lần sau nó tốt hơn, tức là dựa trên những cái kết quả của lần trước chẳng hạn. Yeah.
Hello. May I have a question for work, please?
Yeah, sure.
I just wonder if it's possible for you to share one of the BIM execution plan or any of the previous project that you've done before. I just want to see like how to apply the LOE level of details in each of those projects.
Mm-hmm. I don't have an example on me at the moment. However, there is a lot of examples on how a contractor wants, how the state government wants the development set out. What I'm doing now is I'm just trying to find this information for you, and I'm hoping that might provide some clarity for you.
So have you developed any of the BIM execution plan in the past for those projects?
Yeah, so we have vetted a few.
Are those shareable? Could you be able to share those with us?
Probably not at the moment because they're with the client, so that's theirs to have. But what I would say is you don't have to follow, let's say, any BIM execution template. I think you really need to reassess how it's structured in the document to make it easier for the reader, okay? We write this from the sounds of it, from you, Emily, you write it from a technical perspective, but in the end of the day, the people that are looking at this is the project manager, the procurement team. So they're going to be looking at this and like, well, how is this LOD is going to translate to how much effort and time and cost I'm going to need to apply to that project. So you can break it down simpler in terms of, I'm not sure how the phase works in Vietnam or in the area that you're in, but let's say at concept design, you need an LED of 300, for instance. It's best, instead of saying, you know, duct, pipes, or whatever, LED 300, it's actually better to make a line item which is more descriptive and say, you know, at concept, pipes are to be modeled with the geometry, with size, direction, and so forth. So you being a bit more articulate and specific, and that gives the end users, as well as anyone reading that document, clarity of exactly what they should be doing. Because if you're writing an LED, the LED requirement isn't specific to Revit, it's specific to the geometry and how you want that information presented. So I hope that helps. I am trying to find that example for you. So bear with me.
So for all of the projects you've done, are those like just use Revit or ArchiCAD or any other?
Yeah. So yeah. So typically, the majority that we've seen to date has been a lot of Revit projects, but there's been a combination of ArchiCAD, combination of civil products like Bentley Road, Civil 3D, and so forth. So there's been a lot of tools used, and all of them are at different varying degree. So we are finding it that more and more projects moving in the future now, there is a lot more diversity in the software itself. So it's not always Revit anymore.
Yep. Let's see.
If that helps. Yeah. Trying to find this option here.
Okay, trong cái thời gian mà Anh Quốc tìm tài liệu thì em nói tóm tắt cái ý của chị.
Yep.
Chị với lại em Quốc vừa trao đổi, tức là chị hỏi, tức là em không nghe được đoạn đầu, tức là cái câu hỏi của chị đó là nếu như mà anh Quốc thể chia sẻ những cái ví dụ như là thông tin của yêu cầu thông tin của chủ đầu tư, yêu cầu thông tin của dự án và yêu cầu thông tin của tổ chức, không ạ? Thì anh Quốc
no, it's called BIM Execution Plan. That's đó là cái tài liệu phải nộp cho tại khi ở chính phủ phải nộp cái đấy nó cái kế hoạch sử dụng BIM như thế nào,
kế hoạch thực hiện BIM. Dạ đúng rồi, sorry chị, em lại nhìn nhầm câu hỏi. Tức là cái câu hỏi của thì cái câu hỏi của chị đó là về cái chia sẻ về một cái kế hoạch thực hiện BIM, nhưng mà phía bên Anh Quốc thì lại bảo là tại vì cái đó thì lại thuộc về cái gọi là tài sản của chủ đầu tư, cho nên không có chia sẻ được. Nhưng mà Anh Quốc có chia sẻ một cái ý em thấy là khá là hay, tức là cái góc nhìn của cái người viết cái BIM Execution Plan, cái kế hoạch thực hiện BIM ấy, với lại cái thì nó thiên, tức là người mà làm kỹ thuật thì nó lại thiên về kỹ thuật nhiều hơn, trong khi đó cái góc nhìn của một cái ông quản lý dự án hay là cái việc gọi là project owner hay là phía bên team đấu thầu chẳng hạn, thì đôi lúc thì người ta lại nhìn nó theo cái hướng đó là gọi là làm cái hoạch thực hiện BIM này nó sẽ ảnh hưởng như thế nào đến thời gian, đến chi phí và đến thời gian và đến chất lượng của dự án. Thì cho nên là cái lúc mà mình viết cái BIM cái thực hiện BIM thì mình nên chú ý một cái chuyện đó là làm sao để mà có thể chuyển đổi được những cái ngôn ngữ mà lúc mình viết kỹ thuật ấy, làm sao để cho những cái người mà gọi là end user, tức là người dùng cuối, người ta có thể hiểu được. Ví dụ của Anh Quốc đó là lúc mà gọi là ở trong cái giai đoạn thiết kế concept, tức là thiết kế về ý tưởng ấy, thì cái sơ bộ thì thông thường mình có thể bảo là cái BIM thì nó ở mức độ là LOD 300 chẳng hạn. Thì nhưng mà nếu như mà cái đó thì ví dụ như những người làm kỹ thuật thì người ta có thể biết, nhưng mà mình phải gọi là translate, mình chuyển dịch nó ra làm sao để cho ví dụ như là mình mô tả nó làm cách khác để cho những cái người mà không có phải làm kỹ thuật người ta có thể biết được. Với lại cái câu hỏi thứ hai đó là về cái phần mềm sử dụng phải không chị?
Yeah, so
Vâng, đúng rồi anh ạ. Dạ, vâng, đúng rồi. Phần
Yeah.
mềm, những phần mềm mà họ sử dụng cho BIM thay vì chỉ có Revit hay là còn những phần mềm nào khác?
Yeah. Thì cái em đang không nghĩ, tức là cái nhưng mà cái câu trả lời đó là kiểu những cái phần mềm mà được sử dụng thì đại loại là khá là nhiều phải không chị? Tại vì em cũng không nghe câu trả lời đoạn đó.
Okay,
Vâng,
so
ở đây ngoài Revit ra thì còn có ArchiCAD, rồi phần mềm của Bentley, rồi Navisworks, tức là rất là nhiều phần mềm khác nhau sử dụng cho mục
Đúng
đích
rồi,
làm BIM.
đúng rồi. Tức là thông thường thì nó sẽ tùy vào những cái công tác của dự án, tùy vào cái tính chất của dự án thì người ta có thể yêu cầu những cái phần mềm riêng đặc thù hơn nữa.
So just on that one, Emily, so this is an example that we see typically a lot in a lot of BIM execution plans. And this one breaks it down pretty well. But this is a table, and I'm sure you might have seen this already. And this is where we get the problem in our industry around confusion. Okay, so when you're talking about a structural framing system, that could be, you know, beams, girders, purlins. It's a lot of elements in that one framing system. So to say LOD 100 does not help. So this is when, and for someone perhaps like you and others on this meeting, on this call, you understand this. You know that, okay, when I model a structured beam, it's an architect's role, it's an LOD 300 at concept phase. But to a person that's procuring this and tendering for a project, he's not going to understand what this means. So it needs to be translated in a way that when he reads that line item, so at concept, what's my role as an architect? I need to make sure that I'm designing, you know, the temporary steels, the secondary steel, whatever. But then I also have to make sure that I model it with the correct sizing and so forth, which is reflected of that. Hopefully that helps understand, give you a better understanding on that.
Could you be able to share this particular PDF file with us?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like I said, this is on this
It's
link.
on the web.
online.
Yep.
Yeah.
But what I'll do is I'll just copy this and add it to the little chat group.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Thì ở cái file PDF mà anh Quốc vừa mới share cho mọi người ấy, thì tức là anh Quốc có đưa ra một cái ví dụ, đó là cái về cái kết cấu của cái dự án, về cái thì ở trong cái BIM Execution Plan thì nó viết rất là đơn giản, tức là nó chỉ có là theo kiểu là ví dụ như LD 100 chẳng hạn, nhưng mà với những cái người mà làm về BIM thì có thể người ta biết, nhưng mà ví dụ như những người mà người ta không có trực tiếp làm về BIM nhiều thì người ta sẽ không có hiểu được đó là cái yêu cầu của cái LD 100 đó là cái gì. Cho nên một cái rất là quan trọng ở trong cái BIM Execution Plan, tức là như anh Quốc vừa trình bày ở trên, tức là nó yêu cầu là nó nên tức là cụ thể ra để cho những người không phải làm BIM có thể hiểu được những cái ví dụ như những cái gọi là mức độ chi tiết cho từng cái giai đoạn.
Also, we can see that that with the LD table using unit class system code look a little bit like unfamiliar for us, I think, because we've been seeing that a lot with the uniformat table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the like foundation and then substructure.
Yeah. And ultimately, it just comes down to a preference really, and what system best works with you. I personally think, and this is just my perspective, that a classification is a good start, whichever you use. But I think looking at the author, establishing a good relationship with them so that in an event where you need to make some changes that work for you or your department, you want to know that they are able to help you there, and not just say, well, no, this is how we do it and that's it, because that locks you in their way of doing things and not your own.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see if we have a question on Slido.
Yeah, sure.
So we have one question that you know, like, can you? I'm gonna share my screen a little bit. So here you can see that we have a few questions. So Cương, from about the template for OIR, you know, and other templates, we can have that on the website. So I'm gonna recap that real quick. Thì những cái mẫu template này thì có thể là có các anh chị khác hỏi nữa, thì lúc nãy anh Quốc cũng đã share cái màn hình nó ở trong cái trang VDS Victoria Digital Strategy. Thì tất cả các template từ yêu cầu thông tin của tổ chức, của dự án hay là vân vân, của tài sản ấy, thì đều có thể tìm thấy ở trên đấy. Thì anh chị cứ vào cứ Google cái địa chỉ VDS đấy thì là sẽ tìm thấy các cái template này. Còn một cái câu hỏi tiếp theo của Cương đây, đúng không Cương ơi? Gọi là đo bóc khối lượng với trên BIM. So we have a second question here. Can you share some way of calculate the effective the effective of using BIM, because Cương ơi, đây là hiệu quả lợi ích áp dụng BIM hay là khối lượng đây?
I can try to have a crack at answering it.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if he would like to ask about, you know, the benefit, the effective of using BIM, or
yeah. So there's two ways of approaching it. One is comparing it to, you know, how much money you saved. That's sometimes very hard. I think what you might want to focus on is, like I mentioned earlier, the end goal. So let's say the end goal is a way of life, or, you know, the traffic in a particular city. You want to look at using BIM as a delivery method, but then tracking the non-slightly tangible information. So in Australia, for instance, how we can track how well we do in some projects is health and risk to a job. So we have KPIs, so that's one way of tracking it. So we have used BIM to reduce risk to a project, and we can do this by comparing old projects, saying we tracked 15 near misses, 5 accidents or something, but in this new project we have reduced that now. So that's one way of comparing a quantity, or what we call a key performance indicator, so KPI. That's one way. The other one is, you know, time to close out design issues or something. So how long does it take right now for you to close out a design issue? Some of you will have varying answers. You'll say it takes a week, takes a month, but how much across an entire organization or across a project? And so if you can, that is another way of measuring the value of BIM, is if you can reduce RFIs, reduce turnover of design questions, then that's value to the project, because it does equate down to a cost. So let's say if you pick up a rule that I've used, or some companies have used in the past, is if I picked up a design issue, that's going to save me a day on site. So that's some ways of some people comparing that. I don't think that's a real measurable outcome, but if we can improve turnover of design questions, we can turn over faster RFIs, that's another way of comparing the value of what BIM has done to a project. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't focus too much on BIM's going to save me $200 or it's going to save me 5% on this project, because it's very difficult, because there's so many variables. There's construction methods, the price of material, there's laborers, and even the design itself. I think using BIM to measure those objective goals. So if your objective is for on-time delivery, better planning, so then what I would suggest is, if you're tracking that for better planning, has BIM helped make sure that delivery is on time? And if not, how much has it lagged, or how much have you improved in the time of that project? I think that's what you want to start tracking your project against when you're asking that question around how effective is BIM. Hopefully I've answered that.
Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Kwok.
Excuse me.
Mr. Kwok.
Này bớt nha, em út nó ngồi nó thấy hết.
Yeah, I mean after you check on the IFI and the reducing time, do you exchange all of it to money?
Sorry, I didn't get that question. Just ask the question in Vietnamese, and Thanh can translate to me.
Anh muốn hỏi là sau khi mà theo dõi hết tất cả các cái IFI với cả các cái thời gian mà mình tiết kiệm được ấy, thì bên đấy họ có chuyển sang là thành tiền được không? Tức là mình tiết kiệm được bao nhiêu tiền thông qua các cái IFI và các cái thời gian được rút ngắn đấy.
Cường would like to ask about, have you quantify all the IFI into money? For example, you said that like each IFI can save like a one day in construction site. Do you quantify it into money, like it's gonna cost me like 2,000 a day or something like that?
Yeah, so definitely, I think in most companies and organization, unfortunately, they want to quantify it in value. So if you are picking up, let's say, issues and design issues, they might want to turn that as some type of commercial indicator that how much you're saved on the project. So there's nothing wrong with doing it that way as well. But I think, like I mentioned before, some examples of tracking other information. So like, how many days have I saved? If I've technically used BIM for planning, has my tasks been always completed on time or earlier?
Yep.
Or has it, extended, or there's, we're over time and we're lagging a bit? That then can be resulted into money as well, because, a day is, time is money.
Yep. In one of your slides, you said that Queensland make a statement that the government want to adopt BIM, and then they aim at some objective. Can you return to the slide on that?
Yep, sure.
you know, the objective of reducing costs and so on. There's a list of objective, I think. Yeah.
So here, these objectives here.
Yeah, right here.
Yep. Yeah.
So they said to be more efficient, on time, reduce project risk, and then reduce cost at the end.
Yep.
Do they like force make it mandatory for projects to have a report, a BIM report after, to kind of justify the cost reduce?
Okay. In most projects, it really depends on the client. So I'd imagined if a project's been earmarked as a BIM pilot project, after it's completed, there will be a lot of scrutiny and review. So that will be an internal process that will happen.
Okay.
I think that will most likely happen anyway, because they want to have the lessons learned and really flesh out what's involved. But notice when they set out the objectives, they don't put money on top first, because if you say we want to use BIM to reduce cost, people are just gonna, I wouldn't say fudge the money, but they'll just say, oh, we can do this job for cheap. But ultimately what happens is there's variations and it just becomes risk to the project. I think when you set goals out where anyone and everyone can achieve, there's more value to the whole supply chain, not just the bottom line, if you understand what I mean. So that example of using, if we use BIM and we just use, I guess in this case, 3D models to better plan a project, take the consideration of what actual time is needed. That's just better planning, and vice versa, consideration of these things. And of course, this is the other one here that they have, is promote consistency in data interoperability. So like Emily mentioned earlier, you have different departments using different software and technology. How is this process going to manage all that information? So I think hopefully this helps, because these are the objectives they want to achieve, but the value.
For example, the pilot projects, Ipswich, something, the road, is it finished, the pilot thing?
The Rockley one is still going.
Okay.
That's the one in Queensland. The Victorian example, I haven't really used much, but basically that's just a digital capture. Okay. The transport light rail in Sydney, I think it's still going. I'm not too sure exactly. So this, like I said, if I go back to my slide, this stuff in terms of in Queensland has only really happened in the last 2 years, for us. So a lot of our projects, like infrastructure projects, takes 3 years, 5 years, depending on how big they are. So it's going to be a couple of years until until the government is going to be able to see, well, what actual value did we get? Have we actually saved money? Have we met these KPIs or these objectives that we set out to achieve? So I think in the year's time and so forth, we'll get some feedback, or the industry will. So us consultants will hear more from the state governments saying, well, this is the success we got out of it. Yeah. So like, I guess the question back to you guys is the pilot projects you have in Vietnam, has that started, and how long is that going to take for it to finish?
Well, some of that finished. For example, Cương, the one who just asked the question, he got his project finished, and now we are trying to quantify the BIM benefit into money. So that's why he asked that question.
Sure. Well, if the project's finished, it's going to be a bit harder, because I guess the question back is did you capture all that information that you wanted?
Yeah, they did. They catch all the information. Now you know they know what is the or RFI, and then now the question is that we need to quantify that into money, like you know, it's gonna cost like how much money to trying to repair that if that happened. If you know, without BIM, we cannot see that you know, clash before the construction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you can do a price. You can do a pricing against every design issue and how much is resolved, and vice versa, how much you save. The other one, depending on how long has that design issue been sitting there for. So for instance, in this case, for this project, it takes around 30 days average for design issue or an RFI to be resolved.
Oh, wow.
And then you got, you know, other KPIs such as you have around 85 RFIs that have been left open longer than 10 days, things like that. So these are, metrics that you can capture and give a health rating to some of the projects.
Yeah, okay. But then other than in Australia, are you aware of any like a report from projects that have done such you know, benefit quantification?
Not really. I think the industry now, in particular our construction industry, is only starting to look at data and how it can improve in the industry. I'll show you one example. I'm happy to share this with you guys. Is business performance. So I just want to show you one example. Hopefully, I don't think I have it. No, I don't think I have it. Basically, it's still very early for a lot of companies in the construction industry to start capturing data, because in the past we're so driven by paper, and it's so paper-based that we haven't been able to have a handle on that. I think a good industry to look at is accounting and financial services and share stocks services. You can see that they can track performances within a business before even a company knows that their share price is about to drop, things like that. And that's what a lot of industries globally are starting to look at now. So how can they capture information and data to then better predict, as well as better understand if they're doing well or, you know, spending too much money and so forth. So it's still very new. So I think you guys doing that already is a very good step forward. Yeah.
Okay. Thì nãy giờ cũng hỏi cũng khá nhiều, thì xin phép được tóm lược lại một chút cho mọi người. Lúc nãy thì Cương có hỏi về cái việc là lượng hóa lợi ích BIM, xem là các cái dự án chỗ Anh Quốc làm thì đã có đã lượng hóa cái lợi ích BIM ra thành tiền chưa. Thì anh Quốc cũng có trả lời là ví dụ như là khi mà có các cái RFI thì nhờ BIM họ đã giải quyết được các cái đấy, thì mình cũng có thể là giả định là nếu mà không có BIM thì mình sẽ phải là dừng chờ trên công trường, xong cũng có thể tính ra. Nhưng mà một số cái dự án ở bên Úc, dự án thí điểm hoặc là những cái dự án mà Anh Quốc đã tham gia ấy, thì cũng chưa có chưa có thấy về cái việc là lượng hóa về thành tiền đó, mà cũng chủ yếu là theo dõi. Ví dụ như là những cái lỗi thiết kế, các cái vấn đề đấy thì là nó có các cái thông số theo dõi lại xem là mở những cái lỗi đấy khoảng độ bao lâu thì giải quyết được. Anh trong cái so the clash open that you just show earlier, is that in design or in construction? For example, 32-day average.
Yeah, that was in design.
In design.
And so there's, I guess, to understand a bit of the data, that's actual items closed out. So you might raise an issue. So let's say a design issue. It gets reviewed by someone. They think that it's resolved. So what they'll do is they'll say, oh, yep, I've resolved this, but it needs to be reviewed by someone else. So by the time it gets reviewed, that error, that ticket, if you will, gets closed out. So that's the whole timeline of that. So in this case, it's a estimate roughly around 30 days. We found that in construction, with getting response or design issues or queries left open for roughly 80 days. And that's construction queries such as, if I need to redesign a column, obviously there's time and so forth, and the issue does not get closed out until it's rectified.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why it took so much time, because
because the resolution can happen within a week or within a couple of days, but someone has to review it before they close it down.
Okay. Thì cái thời gian mà 32 ngày cho một cái lỗi để giải quyết trong thiết kế đấy, thì là anh Quốc cũng có giải thích là do là sau khi giải quyết xong thì cũng phải có người review, hoặc là nhiều cái lỗi nó liên quan thì nó liên quan liên thông với nhau. Thì vừa rồi là cái câu ngoài ra thì hiện nay trong cái chương trình thí điểm ở Việt Nam thì một số dự án, ví dụ như là dự án Viettel cũng đang tôi cũng đang tổ chức để lượng hóa cái lợi ích áp dụng BIM, cũng dựa trên cái phương pháp là dựa vào các cái lỗi thiết kế để xong rồi là giả định cái tình huống là nó gặp ở ngoài công trường, để có thể là tính toán quy ra về thời gian và về chi phí. Thế tuy nhiên là như lúc nãy anh Quốc cũng có chia sẻ cái chiến lược áp dụng của bên Queensland, thì người ta cũng có đưa ra một số cái mục tiêu, trong đó là có mục tiêu giảm chi phí. Thế nhưng người ta để cái mục tiêu giảm chi phí xuống cuối cùng, tại vì là thực tế là cái vấn đề này cũng là một cái vấn đề rất là gọi là khó để tính toán một cách rõ ràng, tại vì là không có ai làm một dự án, hai dự án giống hệt nhau, một với BIM và một không với BIM, để so sánh một cách gọi là trực tiếp cả. Với lại là cái việc áp dụng BIM thì ở Queensland thì người ta nhắm đến các cái việc ví dụ như là trao đổi tốt hơn, cũng như là giảm cái rủi ro cho dự án nhiều hơn, và họ để cái việc là giảm chi phí xuống cuối cùng. Thì vừa rồi là cái câu hỏi về lợi ích của Cương hỏi. Không biết là hiện tại thì trên Slido thì cũng đã hết câu hỏi rồi. Không biết là anh chị các bạn nào có câu hỏi trao đổi thêm với lại anh Quốc không ạ?
Excuse me, I have some question to ask.
Yep.
So what is the plan for implementing BIM during the operation phase in Australia?
What's the plan for using BIM for asset management? I guess the ultimate goal is better tools, better systems to better manage the assets. Unfortunately, the problem that every department has and every asset owner is, the problem isn't the new build. Is the new information is fine, you can digitalize that, that's not a problem. It's all the past existing information that you have, other assets that you have right now, and what is the state of that in terms of the data, as well as how well have you assessed that. So the problem that lots of department have is, well, how do we, if we develop a new digital asset solution to manage work orders, how are we going to bring the old information into the new, or how are we going to deal with the new information and integrate it with the old? So at the moment, that's where we're helping a lot of companies in the implementation side. and it's basically thousands and thousands of data entries, drawings that are either PDFs or even just printed out that still needs to be digitalized somehow. And that's where a lot of work is being kind of considered at the moment. A lot of people are investigating this. A lot of departments are starting to question, well, what are we going to do with this older information and how do we bring it to the future?
Well, in Australia, there's a very famous case study for BIM-VN, the Opera House.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you know, using BIM-VN for that project is also like a because that project is so special. Like it's not every building or asset have that much data to to collect. And then you know, in Vietnam there's a lot of projects and a lot of organization, they want to adopt BIM-VN because they have their building already, but they don't realize that if you don't adopt BIM in you know, in the process, it will be very difficult to digitalize all the you know document, all the you know make it into a model and then link that. It's a huge amount of work.
Yeah. Now, with Sydney Opera House, the cost outweighs, oh, sorry, not the cost, the benefit outweighs the cost. So the Opera House itself is quite old, but it is an iconic building and they want to keep it running and maintained for the next 50, 100 years. So that building is there to stay. So them spending and investing a lot of money in upgrading the data, upgrading or developing a digital twin or a digital representation is valuable to them because they see the benefit. And the other thing is with the Opera House is it holds a multiple function within the area. So it's not just for performance and arts, it's tourists, it's you know, restaurants, all sorts of type of activities happen in that one facility. So you can appreciate why better asset management, better management of the facility allows them to better utilize the facility in the other sense as well. So if they can have more people coming through, more shows, more restaurants, things like that, that obviously generates more revenue for the industry. So I guess that's the other question around the assets is if you're capturing asset management just to manage it, it's probably not ideal because you can pay someone to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to have an asset management solution that tracks its performance and how you can better utilize the facility to generate more revenue, that's the, I guess, a goal for a lot of asset owners.
Yeah, and also I don't remember that that is in the strategy of Queensland or Victoria, but I think it's Queensland. They force using BIM for design, construction, and asset management for project more than 50 mil, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's mainly new capital works at the moment.
Yeah.
But there's conversations, and I guess, you know, like I said before, they are looking at the future benefits of where can we use this data for management or asset management.
I think the question that Mr. Chuan would like to know is that you know, are there any detailed strategy about asset management or not? You know, because for example, in Vietnam, it's the same thing. Our program encourage the use of BIM for asset management as well, but then you know, just that I have mentioned that a lot of organizations they send us registration about using BIM for FM, but when they realize that it's not just a simple, you know, laser scan, or you know, it's not going to solve the problem with BIM for FM. Then they didn't start because you know, because of the funding, and they don't see the benefit right away.
Yeah, that's right.
So in Queensland, is there any detailed strategy for asset management?
Not detail in terms of this is how we're going to use it, this is how benefit we're going to get. I think a lot of that asset management is all retained in every department. So I'm sure in your organization, you have a team that knows how to manage their facility. They know how to get the most out of it. The problem is that knowledge is trapped. I won't say trapped, but it's just locked within that group. But how do you have it in a place where it's easy to exchange information with other departments and so forth? And I think that's the question that's always been asked. So no, there hasn't been any further development around that. There probably is internally, but not into the public as I have seen yet. It's still very exploratory.
Okay.
All right. I think we should wrap this up.
Yeah, just one question before because anh Trung ơi, anh có muốn bật mic lên hỏi Quốc không? Hỏi nhanh, tại vì là chắc anh Quốc cũng sắp bận rồi.
Chắc là không. Nhờ Quốc xem trên chat rồi.
Yeah. So key question regarding does the government share data with other departments? They'll share data amongst each other government agency. So if there's a state department that talks with other state departments, they will. But in terms of do the government share information to private sectors? No, they probably won't. That's where you probably go down to local authorities. So even though it's Queensland, that's a state, but then Brisbane has its own like council. They will have information that they share that's available, like for instance, land zoning, things like that as well. So it's probably at the local level, but they very, I would say they wouldn't really share the information unless they are doing a project together and then they have to exchange. But there's no system that has them easy accessible, unfortunately.
Okay.
And for an example, in Canberra, if you would like to have some information about the utility around your building, you need to buy it.
So each state does it differently. Some departments allow it for free, but then others, you have to purchase it.
Okay, so I think we should wrap it up. Thank you so much, Anh Quốc, for your time and for your presentation.
No, thank you for this opportunity, and I really hope that you guys got something out of it and definitely apply it back to wherever in your organization or departments. And best of luck.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks for organizing this. Thank you.